Hello, everyone. Welcome this evening. I wasn't sure whether to do this as a full-on presentation or just a workshop-y kind of format. So how I'm going to do this evening is somewhere a bit in between. So I'll be doing a bit of talking and a bit of doing. And maybe towards the end of this, if any of you have any specific examples of things you'd like sorted or any particular questions around auto layout, I'll be happy to help. So how I'm going to do this evening is I'm going to give an outline to what auto layout is exactly, what the fig is auto layout, draw some parallels with code, because it's very important that we understand why we use auto layout and how that translates to code, and some practical examples and some things to watch out for as you build more complex auto layouts. So
me, if you don't know me already.
I'm Jamie.
I'm working
as UX designer at the moment in a company called SimLocal. And part of what we do in SimLocal is we have a white label product. So as part of my job, I've had to build a multi-brand design library. And through doing that, I've done a lot of auto layout work. And I think I've kind of figured out through failing in every possible way, what are the limitations, how far you can take it. So I won't be able to tell you everything about auto layout in one session. It's a really huge part of Figma. It gets quite complex as you get into it. So if you need to chat to me afterwards, feel free to reach out to me. You can find me on my website. You can email me at jamie@jamieryan.ie.
In or Instagram,
whatever works for you.
So before I go into auto layout,
I think it's really important that we understand the history of auto layout and how things were before auto layout was a thing. So auto layout is essentially Figma's response to a model in CSS called CSS Flexbox. And for those of you who don't know, CSS is essentially it's a styling framework for the web. So anytime you see a website and it has any kind of style applied to it, that's CSS. And Flexbox was a response to limitations people had with having to have fixed widths and boxes, or kind of weird percentage widths, or having separate mobile and desktop websites. I don't know about a few of you, but I remember the time when you'd have to develop a mobile version and a desktop version separately. So what Flexbox essentially does is give people the flexibility
narrow in response to the content. This is really powerful, and I think there's so many examples of this, and it's getting even
better nowadays. So I was trying to pull out a few.
I got a screenshot of your Stripes API page, but to be honest, I realized that showing static screens is not really enough. So I mean, if I pull this down
here, oh, I've lost it. There we go. This is just an example of one of many websites.
I widen or narrow this page. It's responding to the width of the page. So two things are happening. At a certain width, and there's what we call a breakpoint, where it says
at this width, if the viewport is this width, change something in the layout. So we can see some of the content is changing. And you can also notice that the text is responding to the width of the page in a dynamic way. So instead of designing for one type of screen or designing for, one type of viewport, you can essentially create a layout that responds to all different sizes of screens. So we can see again, as I go to
and the content is all real. And as I go to a wider width, it's reassembling as a desktop format. So
I think it's really important that, even though we're going to be talking about auto layout and we're going to be talking about how to utilize that, it's really important that you have some awareness of how that applies in the real world. And I think learning a little
CSS around Flexbox and some of the newer stuff will really benefit your understanding. There's a really
amazing tool.
As we've been trying this sometime, it's called Flexbox Adventure. This is basically
how I got comfortable with using Flexbox CSS. I won't go into it for this session, but I definitely give CSS a look.
even this year or just last month.
Now, as well as like viewport layouts, there's container responsive layouts, which adds a whole new dimension. And this goes beyond even what Figma's own capabilities have. So we want to be using Figma as a tool to take advantage of what's in.
That we won't go down, but
for now, let's go back to the principle. So why do we have auto layout? So classically in Figma, we have what are called frames. So if I draw a box here, that's a.
You can have things inside it. So I can put a rectangle inside this frame.
And
set constraints. So if I set this to constraint to the left
side, if I resize the frame, this knows at the left and the top. So to give you another example, if I constrain this to the right, it will constrain to the right. Okay, well, we have frames, so that works, right?
To kind of highlight some of the
problems with frames and why auto layout is really the way to go in terms of building complex layouts.
It's basically just a testing panel.
There's a lot going on here, breaking it down. There's a lot of rows and containers inside each other. In this example, everything is built with frames.
Static screen, perfect. Doesn't adjust things or add things in response to feedback.
I'm really stuck now. So for example, like, okay, we decided we wanted to use a different text for the button. So I have to type in a new text. It doesn't really respond to the rectangle. I could set another frame and I could jiggle around with this, but every time I change this button text, for example, I now have to change the width of this to respond to it. I'm not even 100% sure what the padding values are there. I kind of have to pixel push to get that right. It's a lot of wasted time. Similarly, okay, let's say, oh, we have an item here that we don't need to use. Now, if I delete that,
into that
change. So now I have to waste time dragging things into position. Have to align this, maybe center align it here. It's doable, right? Like, this is how designers have worked for quite a long time, essentially pushing rectangles around. And there's plenty of designers that still do this. And there are arguments for people who say, well, I don't want to learn auto layout. I can do this really fast this way. But if we look at this in terms of the same component set up with auto layouts, it's so much faster to work with this. If I want to change text here, it's going to respond to the width. There's already defined padding values that don't change. If I want to remove or add items here, I can just add them duplicated onto this column. And I just have so much flexibility. Like, even if I want to add or remove items here, everything's going to respond to what it's contained in.
It just gives the designers so much more flexibility with being able to just
quickly iterate,
find new things out. And really the whole essence of us prototyping and building things in Figma is
we want to work fast, we want to communicate ideas fast, and we want to build systems that have some kind of correlation to how they'll behave in code. So that's why I think, auto layout really is the way to go in terms of building really anything that has this kind of interface. So you might ask yourself then, well, if auto layouts fixed all this, why do we still use?
So I think, why didn't they just replace that with auto layout?
I still think frames have a valid use. And I think the naming is a little bit confusing. I think the best way to think of frames now is to think of frames more like you'd see artboards in programs like Adobe Illustrator, where frames are essentially the
and everything inside can be auto layout. So for example, here's how we might use a frame instead of
an auto layout, for example. So in this example,
drop down. And the problem with a pure auto layout, and you put everything inside an auto layout,
and Oh, have I lost people there?
Yeah, Jimmy, I think your connection might be not
Oh.
great. I don't know if everyone else is experiencing the same.
I
second.
am as well, but I thought it was my computer.
So Jamie, perhaps if you put your camera off,
Yes.
things might get easier. And maybe I know if I have my phone on the Wi-Fi, I have no hope of having any video calls.
Give me 1 second. I'm going to hop to a better connection. Hopefully this works.
Okay.
Have you got me there?
I've got you there. Okay, let's see how it goes. Okay, bye. There we go. Hello.
Okay, try that again.
Cool. Just reshare.
Yeah. So in this case, we have the same mobile view here with the drop-down component, and is all in an auto layout, and one of them has a frame as the top layer. If I use a drop-down in a prototype and it's all auto layout, what happens is when this drops down, it's going to push whatever is underneath it, because that's how auto layouts work. They're essentially related to each other. So the problem is auto layouts can only do so much in these sort of circumstances. Whereas in this case, everything inside of here is an auto layout, but it's all contained within a frame, and a frame lets you have things sort of more sticky. So with a frame, when I open the dropdown, nothing moves. So there are a lot more examples of things like this. I can go into some detail after if we have time. A similar example is in a lot of layouts, you might have something like a bottom sticky navbar. You can't fix that to the screen in an auto layout, whereas in a frame, you can fix that element to the bottom so that if I open this in a mobile prototype view, that frame or that bottom navigation is actually going to appear somewhere up here where the mobile view would be. In an auto layout, you don't get that, so you have to manually resize all your screens to a mobile view. Maybe I'm going too far down the rabbit hole there, but in short, frames are still very useful as top layer elements. So if you are constructing a set of screens, do still use regular frames for those views. And in the frames menu anyway, there's a lot of very handy defaults that you can use that prevent you from having to manually size mobile viewports. So, okay, I might have gone a little too far down that direction. Let's just take everything back to simplicity. So auto layouts, how do I make an auto layout? So it's really simple. So I've got a few examples here of just elements. And I'm gonna, let's see, I've got a frame here, I've got an auto layout here. If I want to make an auto layout, all I have to do is just take two elements. So for example, let's take this icon and this text. And I'm just gonna press Shift-A. Now, nothing appears to have happened, but I know this is an auto layout for two reasons. One is that instead of having this sort of grid or hashtag icon, we now have this icon with 3 lines and a horribly named frame. But every auto layout will have an icon with either 3 lines going vertically or 3 lines going horizontally. This tells us another thing about the auto layout that we'll cover in a moment. I can also see that on the right-hand panel, I've got this new element called auto layout. And also up here, I can see there's these new things called, well, in this case, they're called hug. And we'll talk about what exactly that means. So as well as pressing Shift-A, which I think is a really valuable shortcut and should be your default way of making auto layout, you can also just press auto layout in the right-hand panel, press plus, and that will now become an auto layout. Now, I don't know if you noticed, but there was a slight shift in this case when I took these two elements. So let's just go back here. If I have two elements or more, and they're in some kind of relational position to each other. So what I mean by that is they're roughly in alignment. Figma is going to try and guess how to align these elements. So in this case, it's figuring, oh, this is close to the bottom. So I'm going to align this so that it's like bottom aligned. So to kind of give you a better example of how that might work, let's take these 4 elements. And they're kind of roughly in a row, sort of. Figma will figure out, oh, okay, these are in a row. Maybe it doesn't know exactly how they're aligned, but it will try to guess. This usually works well. Sometimes you will have to tweak it after. But it usually does a good job at creating a basic alignment. Also, what you can do is, if you're the kind of person who's been drawing rectangles this whole time, you can actually, so these 3 elements are separate elements. There's a text, there's an icon, there's a rectangle. You have them roughly in the same position, and you select them all, and you make an auto layout. Oops. Oh, it didn't do it in that case. Let's try again. There we go. You have to have them pretty well aligned, but Figma will understand what you're trying to do in most cases. So now I see it's made an auto layout, and inside that auto layout is just a text and an icon. It actually understood that this rectangle, I want this to be the container, and it saved those styles. So Figma is generally pretty good at making basic auto layouts. One thing you can also do is, in this case, we have just a text element inside an auto layout. And we know it's an auto layout because we see the icon here, we can see auto layout here. And if I type something, it's responding to the width. If you have something that you want to add to this auto layout, what you can do is, well, you can either just copy and paste it in, and it'll position itself inside that layout, or you can drag it in, and you get this really satisfying sort of snap animation. So you can see there's this blue line here. That's telling me where it's going to sit inside. And just for emphasis, if I take this again, you can see when I try to drag this in, it's trying to find where does this slot in this auto layout. Now, the only time you won't is if the element is bigger than the auto layout container. So if you try to drag this in, you might be wondering, oh, why isn't it working? It's not going to automatically snap in if it's bigger than the container, but you can still add it to the auto layout by copying and pasting it in. It's just going to change the height. So it's one to note if you're kind of wondering why is it sometimes snapping and sometimes not snapping. So to really talk about this panel in detail, there's a few elements that we're going to go through one by one. So up at the top of an auto layout layer, when it's selected, you have these resizing parameters, and they'll usually by default be called hug or fill or fixed. Usually Figma will try to guess which one you need. We'll go through what that does in a moment. In CSS, that's usually referred to as flex grow or width. And then below, we've got our main auto layout controls. So we've got the direction that the auto layout is going in. So typically, that's going to be in a vertical or a column or horizontal, a row. And in CSS, that's just called flex direction. We've got the space between items. So that's the white space between each item. So in this case, you can see that it's automatically set this gap between the items. In this case, it's 8. And in CSS, that's just called gap. You've also got the padding down here. Whoops. So by default, you can set either the left and right side padding or the top and bottom padding together, but you can also set them individually. And then we got this box. And this is basically where should the items align in this container? So should they hug the top corner or the center or side? And there's an extra setting here that we'll go into. So that's a lot of information. So we're just going to go through one at a time and just look at how that works. So I've just made these very basic sort of cards. And to highlight kind of how these behave, we'll first go through the resizing parameter. So normally in Figma, when you resize something, you can just drag the side, drag it up and down. But with auto layout, you can also have it automatically set the sizing. So in this case, if we just highlight these two elements inside, we've got basically this box, and this is sitting inside an auto layout. And I'll just bring up that layer to show you there. We can see that if I drag this guy up and down and this guy left and right, these now say fixed. So these act like regular rectangles. These are basically going to change their width no matter what. If I change the horizontal resizing, and we know because it shows that little left-right icon. If I change that to hug contents, and we'll just do that again, you can see that little red arrow. That's showing you, the red arrow on the left and right showing you, that's where you're going to end up if you select this. So when I select this, what it's basically doing is, I'm going to look at everything inside here and see how I can just hug the contents of what's inside. Usually this works fine, and it's kind of the default way auto layout behaves, and it's usually for things like buttons. This is generally what you want. There's another way to resize content, but you won't see it here. So there's another option called fill container. If I go in a layer, we'll actually see it here. So to give you a better example of how this works, if I just, for the purposes of this example, I'm just going to put a little border around this. So I have this box selected. If I set this to fill container, it's filling the container that it's in to the best of its ability. It's looking at what's around it and going, how much space can I occupy without interfering with anything? So if I select fill, you can see that that box is now filling this container. So the reason we can't use fill container on the whole box itself is because, well, it's not sitting in anything. Okay, there is a frame here, but auto layout doesn't initially look at the frame at the top level. You have to give it an initial size at the top level, either by hugging the contents or setting the width to fixed. But for layers that are inside a container, they have something to reference against, so they can see, okay, I know what size the thing above me is, I can fill that. And the same goes for vertically. So again, if I select fill for the vertical, the up and down guy here, this is going to try and fill this. And you can see this if I drag this up and down, this is really, I can set this to fill as well. This is trying to fill all the space it can, both horizontally and vertically. So that's basically container resizing. There are some caveats to this, especially if you have nested auto layouts. If you have a mix of things that are filling and hugging, you're going to have to play around with them one by one to make sure you get a combination of behaviors that work. But I'll go over that in detail when we start looking at nesting. But what the basic things to understand is these two guys are how you control how auto layouts behave in terms of what's around them. And it's the same here. If I set this and move this back and forth, you can see this is set to fill. So it's trying its best to fill that space, and the image itself is set to fill. So it's scaling proportionately.
Jim.
Yes.
I think your browser's stopped.
Oh, you can't see my screen?
It's just frozen. Maybe
damn.
try.
I'm really having bad luck with this one, huh?
No, you're grand. It's probably my fault for changing format. Sorry.
Can you see me now?
Yeah, we're good.
Yeah.
It might have just been my screen. Sorry. Go for it.
That's all right. So as I just said there, this box inside is set to fill. So it's set to fill horizontally, but I don't want it to move vertically. It's set to fix vertically. So what will happen is this will try to fill that horizontally. It's something you get a feel for pretty fast when you start doing it. I'm trying to the best of my ability to show this, but I think when you actually start playing around with it, you get an instinctive feel for that at a basic level pretty fast. Then we have the auto layout direction. So this is fairly easy to understand. So in this example, I have two big elements here. So I've got this container, and this is set to vertical. If I click horizontal, that's going to go horizontal. Now, you notice here, there's a little bit of overlap. In this case, I can just pull that out. When we get to nested auto layouts, we'll talk more about what happens when we have multiple directions going on. But what you need to know just for now is that if I click this, it's vertical. If I click this, it's horizontal. And then we have the gap. So the gap is fairly simple. It's basically this little icon here, horizontal space between items. So that refers to how big that gap should be between the elements. And I can set that just by dragging this left and right. If I click over the icon, or I can just set a number, and it'll set that value. And it's the same for a vertical layout. If I drag this up and down, it's just it's basically the space between any elements here. So if I add another picture here, you'll see. If I change that gap, it's changing the gap between all the items. This is particularly useful if you have something like a form and you have maybe 4 or 5 elements and you want to have even spacing between them. You can, instead of having to manually place them, you can set a gap and it'll follow that. And then we have padding, and padding is just underneath gap. So by default, it lets you set horizontal padding and vertical padding, and that's just like if you do it in code. So in CSS, typically with padding, if you just give 2 values, it'll presume you mean horizontal value and the vertical value. So if I set this value here, you can see that the left and right, the white space between the elements, here we go, that's going to change. And I can also change this by dragging inside the element itself. It's something that I actually forget quite often because it's a relatively new feature, or it hasn't been around as long. But if I drag this, you'll notice here it's changing the value. Now, in this case, I've started changing one side, so now it's doing something funky here. Let's take it back to just one value. You can also do that for the vertical. And if I click this icon here, it looks a bit like a broken up circle. I can actually see all the values now. So if it was a case where I knew this had to have more white space in the bottom, I could set the bottom padding to be bigger for emphasis. There's a bit extra value. And I can also set those individually. If I hold the shift key, I can also set this based on my nudge value. So if any of you haven't heard about the nudge value, if you press Command and / and then type nudge, you can set your small nudge, which is when you just use the arrow keys, or a big nudge, which is when you use shift and the arrow keys. And I typically have this set to 8. So if I use the shift key, I can basically use my big nudge to change that. That can be handy if you're doing some fine tuning. And if I hold the option key while I'm doing it, I can either set both of these at the same time, or if I hold option and shift, or alt and shift of your windows, I can set all the padding at once. So that's basically padding. In CSS, if you're talking to a dev, they might ask you about padding and margin. Figma only does padding. So basically, correct me if I'm wrong, Mitch, but margin refers to the white space inside the container, and padding refers to the space outside the container, right?
I think it's the other way around.
Oh, damn, you're right.
Wait.
No, I think, well, basically in CSS, there's 2 layers of padding, margin and padding. And so I've seen this, this causes confusion when designers are communicating to devs. And they're saying like, oh no, the padding's 48, like what, there's no margin.
Let me go to Webflow.
Yeah.
Because I remember in Webflow, they have a wonderful little diagram, which I'll paste in here, but that tells you exactly the difference between margin and padding. Okay, here we go. So margin is outer, padding is inner. So right. Margin is the space after the end of the barriers of the div.
Yes.
And padding is how much, so you think of padding like the padding in your couch. It happens inside the couch. and margin is how much space between your couch and the end table, for example.
So you can do margin. How I do it, if I need to communicate margin to devs, is I'll take this auto layout and I'll make another auto layout by pressing Shift A, and I'll quickly call this like spacing or margin so I don't get confused. And you can see I've got, yeah, perfect. I've got like an outer padding for this container. So I've got the inner, I've got the inner padding, which is just padding, and then I've got the outer white space, which is the margin. Now, it's really just if you're specifically needing to declare this with developers, it can be helpful. By default, Figma just handles padding. And if you're getting started, just be worried about padding for now.
Also, if it's your first time working with developers, it's helpful just to take them through what's in Inspect and tell them half your work's done already.
Yeah, right. And that's actually another thing. If we go into the Inspect panel and we scroll down to CSS, there's that flex display I was talking about. This is essentially using a simplified version of Flexbox. Now, use all the properties of Flexbox, and we'll go over that at the end. There's some things you can't do in Figma yet, like wrapping items so that they automatically reorder to the next line, that you often see in websites. But it gives you a good start. And what can be really fun actually is if you're getting the hang of the CSS side of it, you can copy and paste the code for simple elements and see how it looks in code and play around with it and kind of get an understanding of how it works. Won't dive into that because that's a real rabbit hole. That's weeks worth of fiddling around. But we'll move on to align, and that's one of the last items we have. So we'll jump back to the design panel. So alignment, to make this a bit clearer, I'm going to open up this box. Alignment is basically where should everything inside sit. So it always refers to what's inside the thing you selected. You've selected, for example, I'm terrible at naming my layers, but we'll just for clarity, we'll say this is the weather box, this is the details. If I set the alignment of the weather box to the middle of this box here, now everything is centered. So if I move this around, this is going to stay in the center. Similarly, if I move to the left, it's going to stay this way. And this also applies to any auto layout that happens to be nested in another auto layout, which is a very common thing that you will start getting used to, and we'll try out a bit at the end. If the alignment is set uniquely for each auto layout. So if this is now looking at what's inside this box and what can I realign to. So if I select right aligned, it's going to realign to the right. If I select, it's going to center everything. That's how alignment basically works. There's also another thing that's very important to note, which is, so I've got, let's use this example. So I've just set these two things are hugging their contents, and I have this.
Sorry, Jamie.
Yeah.
Someone says their screen is frozen.
Oh no! Again.
Yeah, I think I don't think it's a you problem.
Mitch, would you be able to link to the file? Because sure. Even if they can't see the screen, they'll be able to follow along in the file.
That's a great idea. Sorry to interrupt again. Thanks.
No, that's okay, and thanks for pointing that out. We'll get that sorted for you. This is our first time using this new platform.
Yeah, shame. Don't apologize, guys. It's our issue. We'll sort it out.
But it is important to see it, right? It's one of those things like I can say all these words, but actually, if you don't see it, it's, I don't know, it's like describing a color.
Yeah, so if you're struggling to follow, you can follow in Figma. You should be able to get in.
Yeah, so that link there will jump you to the file. And if you click my icon on the top right of your Figma screen, you'll be able to find me straight away. So, and I'll highlight whatever I'm saying quickly again if you've missed something in particular and you want me to go over it. So in terms of alignment, I've got this weather card, and maybe it's a case where I don't want this this cloud icon or this rain icon to be beside the details. I want them to be at opposite sides of the card, but I still want that flexibility. So if I like drag this narrower or wider, I want these things to be on two opposite sides. So instinctively, you might think, well, I'll just take this gap in the middle, or the gap here in the right-hand panel. I'll just drag this until like it looks roughly right. So right, that looks good. But then as soon as I start resizing, the problem is that gap is fixed. And so we're going back to that old way of doing things where it's like, oh, now I have to pixel push. Every time I resize this, I'm gonna have to like realign everything perfectly. So there's a really nice way of handling this, which is space between. So there's two ways of doing space between. By default, these lines here are in a little packed alignment. Now, there's no setting for this here, right? But if you click the three dots, you'll see there's a thing called spacing mode, and there's a nice little diagram to highlight what's happening. So if you're on the file and you look at your auto layout, you'll see a three-dot icon, and that's the advanced auto layout settings. So if I select space between, suddenly we get this new diagram, I suppose, of 3 lines spaced apart, and I can only use top, middle, or bottom. I have no choice now for sides. It's automatically taking whatever's inside this container and pushing them as far apart as possible. And to give you actually an even better example of how you might apply this, if I quickly rejig this, so let's say this is an icon on the nav bar, and I have maybe 4 of these icons, and I have the spacing set to space between. These will always be spaced apart from each other. So you have this really great flexibility that really aligns with, you know, that responsive design where you've got slightly different sizes of mobiles and you need a nav bar that's equal each time. You can also set that padding, so it's going to respect the padding on the left and right, and also try to keep things apart. There's 2 ways you can do this really fast. You can click on this box so that the box is blue, the alignment box, and you can press the X key, and you can see that icon change. That's going to switch between space between and packed. Or you can just type auto inside the gap, and that's going to automatically set that to space between. And you can always tell space between just because those 3 lines are now spaced away from each other. So yeah, alignment has a few extra options that get a bit niche. So if I go back to a packed view, I can actually set this to a negative value. This is sort of a niche thing. So one example that you see a lot is, let's say you have, I don't know if you've ever seen those like social media things where you see like lots of people's faces and they're overlaid in a sort of stack. Well, if I set my auto layout into a negative value, and let's pretend these are faces. Maybe I can pull out something really quick, like a cat picture. So do you have any cat pictures handy, Mitch? Let's see if I can get one faster.
Oh, I've got something there. I'm in the wrong section. I'm already on the next page. I have a cute little mouse thing. I don't know if that helps. So so you're copying and pasting the image as a
yeah.
fill.
So what I did there actually, and like it's something I've just gotten super used to, is you can take basically you can copy the style of a layer, and the image fill is considered a quote unquote style. So if you have like a big image and you want to fit it into a shape, what you can do is you can press Command Option C or Control Alt C, or you can go to the copy menu and you can go to copy paste as, and then copy properties. And then you can just go into that shape and paste the properties, and it will basically take whatever those properties were. So In this example, yeah, that packed value, if I set it as a minus value, it's going to stack. And if I go to those advanced options again, there's even an option to stack it in a different direction. So if I go into advanced auto layout settings and go to canvas stacking, I can have it so that the first one, or the left side, is on top, or the right side is on top, the last element, and that's referring to the layers inside. It's a bit of a niche feature. I personally have rarely ever used this. I think it's specifically for cases like this where you want like a stack of items on top of each other. But for the most part, I would say when you align things, you're typically just going to be, are they packed in one side, or are they spread apart, and are they kind of in the corner or centered? Like that's generally how you align things. So yeah, Mitch is oh, that's a oh, so cute.
A little ass.
So yeah, that's alignment, and that's also some of those advanced features. So if you click those three dots, you get even more auto layout features. These are very niche kind of features. So spacing mode, I personally think should be outside of this menu. I think it's not advanced more so as it is essential, but then you can always use the X key to switch that. Strokes refers to basically, if you have like, so this box has a stroke on it, you can tell this whether it should include that stroke or exclude that. And it would be more obvious, I think, if I had the stroke outside. So let's say if I have a big ass stroke on the outside, you can see that it's counting the boundary of the box as the box without the stroke. But in the auto layout settings, oh, or maybe, gosh, you know what? I don't even know how to use that feature. Maybe, oh, it's referring to, I think, when there's boxes inside, is it?
Yeah, I think you're right.
So
Try
in this
it out.
case, let's do a big ass stroke box. No, gosh, that's a mystery. I think at one point I'd figured out what this meant, and then I'd subsequently had forgotten because I never used this feature.
Is it not changing? Is it not about the
There we go.
48 and 16 that you have? Yeah, okay.
Yeah, it's when the stroke is inside the box. So
yeah. So when it calculates the 16 for the margin top and bottom, padding
Yes.
top and bottom,
right.
is it including the stroke?
So if your stroke is on the inside of the box, it's basically that setting will tell you like, okay, is it 16 from here to here or 16 from here to the outside? Really specific niche feature, one maybe for pixel obsession people. But yeah, the advanced features, like for the most part, you won't use these. Text baseline can be useful if you've got like a really awkward situation where, for example, I have used text baseline alignment before. It's when you have like a text element, right? Maybe, can you think of an example, Mitch?
I think if you have a button and the button text uses both, oh, damn it, what's it called? So, but Dublin is fine because it's got, it's only got ascenders. But if you had something like something with descenders, you would sort of run into the problem of it's not taking into account the sizes you would expect it, right? So if you make your margin quite tight and then you change that, you'll see the difference.
Yes.
Now it's, yeah. So that baseline would
Even
adjust.
then, it's not the best example, but what you can hear, if you look carefully, the bottom of this box is going to align with the baseline of the text. Whereas if we don't have that setting on, the bottom of the box is aligning with basically the bottom. It's below the descenders.
I guess if you have like a massive headline,
yeah,
and you want the icon to be in line with the text,
right.
But your headline is like Google is a good example. if you have Google and then an icon, you want the icon to be in line with the body of the typography, not the full span of ascender plus descender. I don't know what that's called.
It's like,
yeah.
It's like funny. You put me on the spot and ask me to think of an example. I can't quite pull one out, but you're going to have times you have an icon and a button text and it looks wrong. Like you can see it looks wrong. It's misaligned and you're not sure why. And you click baseline alignment and suddenly it's like, this works. And that is also an alignment setting in CSS. So it translates one-to-one. Pull out an example after if I can find one. It's like, I know I'm using it, but it's like, so it's very specific. And it's usually around buttons. And like, it's usually when you have a button and an icon and the icon is like, has no padding around it. It's wrapped right up to the edges. And you get this sort of like, you go to center the two elements and they're slightly skewy.
Sorry, I'm just messing about, mate. Don't worry about me.
Yeah.
But I'm just kind of thinking like, if you take this and then you got your auto layout and you say text line, align text to base. I'm not sure. I can't imagine how I would use that.
Like, I think if we take this icon and let's on from this. I'm like, I won't let this ruin me. Let's say this icon has like right up to the edges content. Like, so I'm in outline mode right now, which is like really making this obvious. So if you press Command Y or Control Y, you can switch between outlines and regular text.
Oh, sorry, I cut out there for like a good 10 seconds. But
you can kind of see this clearly here, right? So if I don't have baseline alignment on, you can see that the icon and the text, they are centered, right? So like this is in the center and this is in the center, but if I were to kind of let's put some padding around this just to highlight. Even then, it's like it's not super obvious, but it doesn't look right. Like you can see the box here and the baseline, the line below this text, they're not aligned. And if you try to align it like, like this, that's not going to work. And if you try to align it like this isn't going to work. And this isn't the best example, right? I promise you, if you work with this long enough, you're going to come across an example where you go, baseline alignment is like the best feature ever. But it's just like, I can't really, like not doing a good job at like highlighting it. But if you toggle there, see, it's like, it just aligns elements at times when the alignment is not really working in the default. But look, I feel like I won't be able to explain this unless like.
No, I think that's really. I think that's the best we could do at this point because I can't think of any other way that you would use this. I do remember going and doing buttons and have 2 pixels to the bottom of every single button because it just wasn't working.
Yeah, I think some texts, particularly if you're using line height and some icons, they just don't work when you try to just center them without any context. They actually need to be aligned by the baselines. But to pull, because I think, auto layout has this habit of just getting you stuck in like the deep end of like specific things. If we take nothing else from what we've learned so far, is that up at the top, when we select an auto layout, we can hug contents, we can fill the container of when there's things inside. We can set the direction of the items. So we can set them vertically like this. We can play around with the gap. Or we can have that gap automatic, space between, so that they're automatically always at opposite ends. Or if there's many elements, like this, we'll tend to find a way to make them equally spaced, even if that means squashing them a little bit. And sometimes you might want a little bit of squashing, like in this case. And the padding is self-explanatory. So the padding is basically that white space around your elements. And then you have a few extra options which have sort of niche cases. So you might have noticed, like, okay, I've been talking about this component, but this isn't just a picture or a layer. This is an auto layout of its own. So this is where auto layout becomes really powerful, and it's where you're probably getting stuck or getting hung up, which is, you know, you've nesting auto layouts kind of starts working like, okay, I've started off with a button, and that button might just be a text layer, and then as an auto layout, that's fine. We know how to do that. And then we might have two buttons, and we go, oh, I can do an auto layout on these two buttons. Great, like still just two elements, quite easy. And then we get to the point where it's like, oh, I need like a text layer, and I also need maybe a picture and text, but this is going this direction, that's going that direction. Some things are filling the containers, some things aren't. The alignments are all different. And I find this is where like everyone gets hung up. It's like a rite of passage with auto layout. Like you're going to have something where you try to move something and a bunch of errors come up, or things saying, oh, this is now set to fixed width. And you're wondering, why isn't it stretching? So to kind of round this off, before we kind of get some questions or get some feedback from people, let's just look at how we would build something like this in the most basic way. If you were doing this in code, you typically are going to be working from the outside in. So how it works in CSS is you're defining the outside box first, and then the next layer of things, and then the next layer of things from the outside in. You can work this way as well in Figma, but I find the most successful way to doing this is working inside out. And in this example, it's essentially working inside out. So if you're building something like this card, for example, this looks a bit like a social media card or some standard kind of information where you've got, you know, a title, content, and actions. The best thing to do first is have in your head what you're trying to achieve, and just get a sense of, okay, like what's the first element I can start with. So in this case, it might be that you start with text or you start with the button, but in this case, let's start with the button. So when you're building an auto layout button, don't worry about drawing rectangles, drawing any of those boxes. The auto layout is your button box. So if you guys want to like join along and try this out, you can get started anywhere on the page. It's for free for all.
I think we'd probably have to make a new page because only you and I can edit on this.
Oh, draft. Okay, we might.
But if you really want to, I can add your email.
Well, I'll just get started. I mean, what do you guys think? Do you want to join in? It's up to you guys. What do you reckon, Mitch?
I think it's okay. I think let's carry on with what you're doing because we're nearly finished. So
yeah. Okay. Okay. So I'm going to do this pretty fast, right? Because I think I potentially over-talked about overlayout at this stage. So I'm looking at this and thinking inside out, what do I want? So I want to start with buttons. So I make a text layer, and then I press Shift-A, and now it becomes an auto layout. It already sets padding, by the way, based on your big nudge amount, and the gap is based on the big nudge amount. It doesn't always do this, but by default, if you're just setting one element, it's going to make padding automatically. If you really hate that, you can set I think you can set your big nudge to 0. But just be aware that that's where that spacing is coming from. So I
did not know that.
Yeah.
That is very cool.
So that's why for me, it's always 8, but by default, it'll always be 10. So I'll give that a border radius up here, and maybe I'll give that like a bit of space, something like that. Okay, and there's my button. So I've got text, and if I type more things, it's going to respond. So I can duplicate that because there's a second button here. Maybe I'll call this one cancel. And then I can take these two, select these two auto layouts, and if I press Shift-A again, I've got another auto layout, and I've been poisoned with a terribly long frame number because there must be some element that has a big frame number. So what I'll do is I'll call this button row. Now, typically when I'm building like these sort of complex layers of auto layouts. Every time I make an auto layout, I'll quickly press Command R or Control R and just name this something that makes some kind of sense. Because what can happen is the auto layout is not a toggle, it's an action. So if I press Shift A again, it's going to make another auto layout. If I press Shift A again, press it a bunch of times, I end up with this thing that I like to call like a stairway to hell, which is a whole bunch of auto layouts with nothing in them except more auto layouts. And this will happen when you're kind of building stuff really fast. If you realize you've built too many auto layouts and you're kind of like in this horrible position, you can press Control Shift G or Command Shift G, and that will basically remove the auto layout that's selected. So I don't remove my button row auto layout, because if I do that, these are going to be separate elements again. So I'll bring that guy back. So I've got my two buttons here, and the gap between them is 24. And these are set to hug. So this container will hug whatever's inside it, these two buttons. And I know there's going to be a text layer there, so I will set that text. And I'm roughly aligning these as I kind of make this. So I'm just kind of picturing like, what do I need here? Okay, I need a picture box, so I'm going to make a rectangle for now. Ooh, cool. Do you want to drop that image into that box, Mitch? There we go. And I can also see there's going to be some avatar up here, and I'm guessing the idea here was to have like a title and text. So what I'll do is I'll write title, and then I'll duplicate that by Option dragging or Alt dragging, and then I'll just maybe say a few days ago. So if I were to just drag all this now and make an auto layout, it's not going to quite work the way we want, because an auto layout will only work in one direction by itself. And this is really the key with nesting auto layouts. So you have to start thinking inside out. You've got all of your elements here, so you have to start thinking in directions. So like I can see these two are going to be vertical, but these all together are going to be horizontal. So again, it's working inside out. It's thinking like, okay, what's the minimum amount of like elements that I can make an auto layout with in one direction? So I'm going to select these two and press Shift A, and it knows that this is vertical, so it's already set that direction for me, and I can set that gap. And then I can set, now that's one element, I can select these two boxes and press Shift A. So we have like auto layouts happening inside of each other, right? So we've got this vertical two boxes, and then we've got these two boxes horizontal. And then I can go this, and this are all vertical. I can press Shift A. And now I have something that's very close. So we're at the point now where it's like, okay, I can see in this diagram, this is aligned to the left and this is aligned to the right. So what I can do here is I can take this container and I can set it to fill container, and I can have that left aligned. And to kind of emphasize that, I'll actually give this whole container a shape and some padding. So now I've got this filling the container. If I set this to hug, this is only going to align to whatever way the whole container is aligned. So in this case, it's aligned to the top center. If I align it to the left, I can leave this like this, but typically it's good practice if you have this like filling the container. If this is intended to fill this space and nothing else is here, I would set it to fill. And then it's similar with these guys. If I select these two and set that box to fill, I can now align this individually to the right. It's important not to forget that you should check all of your layers inside to see how they're filling or how they're fixed or hugging. Because what happens is you think everything looks fine and you go to drag it and it's like, whoa, that's not what I wanted. Like, why is my content not doing nice things? The thing is, this text is set to fixed. This is set to fixed. So these are you're telling these essentially not to move. So to kind of make this obvious, if I now select this image and select it to fill horizontally, it's now going to respond properly. And if I select this text and select it to fill, it's not only going to fit the container, but it's actually going to smartly understand that like this text is wrapping in here. I need to like make some space vertically because we haven't told this to do anything vertically except to hug what's inside it. So if I add more things, that's going to fill the available space, right? And now as I resize this, it's thinking, okay, as I get more space here, I don't need to take as much space vertically with the text. So you get that kind of proper effect now that you see in websites when you're resizing. And that's, you can do things then, like if you wanted these buttons to both fill the space, if you select them both to fill, they're both going to occupy 50-50. And then we can shift select both these and set those to align in the middle. And then if we want to maybe make one smaller, we can have this one maybe hugging the contents and this one filling. And you can see everything is a relationship to each other now. And when we do, and then when we test this vertically, we can see, oh, this is not filling out. So what do I want to fill the space? If I want the image to fill the space, I can set the image to fill vertically. Now that image is going to try and like take up all the space. But maybe this is like Instagram where, you know, it's, or the old Instagram at least, where you want this to fill like horizontal, a vertical square space and horizontal square. Now if I set that to fixed, and maybe set the text to fill, we'll just like emphasize this. The text is going to attempt to fill that space as much as it can, and it's going to try and it's going to hold that. Even if I resize it smaller, it's going to try its best to fill that space. Sometimes you have to play around with constraints, right? If something isn't working, it's usually that you set too many constraints. So in this case, this text is nowhere to go because it's trying to fill all directions, but you haven't given it any space. So if I set this to hug, oh, and then we get one of our famous messages where it's like height set to fixed. So I don't know, Mitch, can you explain this better than me? I think you understand what I'm talking about. Like there's, when 100%. You start having lots of constraints, Figma's going to start to try and like fix things because you're giving it too many directions or too many instructions.
Yeah, absolutely. So the way that I always think about it is, I think you've explained it really well, Jamie. The way that I try and think about auto layout is the vast majority of the time, it's like filling a container or a lunchbox with lots of little sort of compartments. So if I have this example here, I've got quite a complicated example here where I have a single auto layout, and then within that, I've got these two separate ones. And then within that, I have 4 separate ones. And then within that, each individual. So the way that you make the most flexible thing is by making everything full. So in terms of how that would work structurally is you need one item at the top level to be fixed. It needs to have a single, it needs one static number somewhere in the structure to give it a clear and obvious specific number to work from. And then everything else is based on that number. So when you are filling, that fixed number is at the top of your structure. In other words, it's the size of this object, right? So if you are using a full container, you have a structure that says fixed, and then everything else is full container, full container, full container, all the way down, right? If you're doing it the other way and you are trying to hug, if you're in a hug sort of method, your fixed item needs to be at the bottom, and then you can either full container or hug all the way up. So when you are working, so the sort of thing that you're doing here, where you're sort of working from the inside out, which I also do. Like if someone tells me make a brand new page, I start with a button and then I work my way out. You are typically going to, have something that's fixed for the time being, but as soon as possible, you're going to remove those constraints as you go up, so that you only have a single fixed constraint, which is usually your canvas, because your canvas is to spec. Your canvas is usually, your developers want a view that's 1920 wide, so that's what you're going to provide, right?
Yeah.
And the rest of it is up to you. So I have a question for you, Jamie.
Yeah.
And I'm sort of on, I'm kind of a bit on the fence about this, but I'm sort of coming of the opinion that maybe columns aren't a thing anymore. Maybe that's not a thing that we have to worry about as much as we used to.
So to kind of give people context, before we had a lot of these things, and actually it's still very relevant to web development. There's basically a theory, I don't know, a theory or a framework where if you look at a lot of websites, particularly news websites, they use a mix of this flex display that we're talking about and grid. So basically, yeah, you've got it right there. The website has these columns, and typically it's usually in a number like 6 or 4 or 12. And yeah, they might be set in such a way, right? Yeah, 12 column desktop is exactly it, might have. So yeah, okay, it's got a bit of white space because if you don't want everything just like stretching out. And then inside this, inside these columns, you might have like, this is the box for the main article, and maybe then there's like a sidebar box here, and maybe there's like another box here. And the idea is, if I set constraints right, as you not like that. Gosh, it's been a while since I used this concept. How do you do that again?
Well, so the thing is that the constraints here are based on a set width. So if you change the width to, it's very difficult to use the columns in conjunction with auto layout. The only thing you can do is maybe sort of remove the padding. So the idea would be that you would have, another layout, which is your
yes,
your mobile view, and you would make your 12 column grid there, which would actually just be like a 3 column grid. To be honest, I just haven't had cause to use this sort of what they call a bootstrap. I haven't had cause to use bootstrap for quite a few years now. Like it doesn't seem like most developers care about that anymore, because you can just flex.
I can't do it. Yeah, the thing is, before auto layout, like the common way to do this in Figma was that you had these columns, and you could set your constraints, which is the kind of the old school way of like kind of sizing, in such a way that when you resize this box, these boxes will hold on to this. They'll basically change along with the width of whatever you set these grids to. So it's like to a point, and I just can't get it to work now, and I'm really annoyed. It's not working. But how it's supposed to work is these resize at the same time as the grids, and then at some width, it suddenly becomes only 8 columns you can use. So you move around some things, and then it's only 4 columns. Oh, you got it.
You just changed the option from type, I had it at center. You change it to stretch.
Okay.
And then you
Yes.
can add a margin as well if you want. It's just I don't know. It kind
There
of
we
feels
go.
old-fashioned to me now. This idea.
It's well, I mean, it depends on who you talk to, right? So this is the example. So Figma doesn't have breakpoints, so we can't suddenly jump this view. There is a plugin that can do it, although it is not free. Where basically and you'll see this if you look up like resizing grids online. Basically, this content will stretch these grids, and at some width, then you switch. So it's only like 8 columns, right?
Yeah. So in CSS, it's called a media query. So if the media or the width of the screen is less than this, then you're changing it to a 6-column grid or a 3-column grid, which is kind of a misnomer, actually. It's more like the better way to think about it is your 12 columns now all merge into 1 column or into 3 columns. It's a little bit, it's kind of its own subject and kind of confusing. But yeah, that's exactly what we're talking about.
Yeah, for those of us with access to a non-frozen screen, which I'm again sorry about. This is a plugin that called Breakpoints that attempts to do this in real time in Figma. It does a really, really weird hack to make this possible that I don't fully understand. But it's a cool plugin, and as well as the kind of the grid thing we were talking about, that plugin lets you do one thing that you can't do in Figma, which if you're communicating to devs, you'll have to communicate with static screens, which is basically, I'll try to pull a real quick example. Let's say we've got maybe these guys are items on a screen. And maybe we'll just scale them down because they're rather large. Use K for scale there and put in 0.25. So if I have a screen here, right? I'll just give these. Maybe I'll just make this background a little darker for emphasis. I want to tell the developer, like, okay, I want this so that, like, I want this so that when the screen gets narrower, these items start to wrap like this. And that's one thing that Figma doesn't do yet. It's a very heavily requested feature. And I wonder, like, inevitably when they're going to introduce it, we can't show in real time, like, when you resize the screen, this jumps down, because auto layout only works in one direction and it doesn't wrap. Text wraps, and that's very useful. So, like, as I showed you before, like, the text will wrap and resize, but the items themselves, you have to basically, when you're doing when you're talking to developers and communicating, like, how maybe a website should work, you need to have, like, a version of the screen that's maybe for tablets, a version that's for desktop, and maybe on the tablet version, you show that these work like this.
Yeah.
And then on the mobile version, it's maybe just one column, like.
There is one way I've done it previously, which is kind of like makes your life a bit easier, but again, you're having to do each one manually, as you say, Jamie, which is if you make a component set, right, and you have all of these different sort of media queries in sort of pre-created, then all you would need to do is when you stretch this, just change it to one of the different blocks. So you've got 3 different. I mean, you could do that, but again, it's not. You know, what if Figma manages to get this right, that's it for pretty. I mean, you can basically take your prototype and put it online. It's exactly what you need, right? Like, what else do you need?
Text inputs.
Sure. Well, you can kind of do that.
Fake text inputs. That's a conversation for, like, another day. I have very strong feelings about that. I think, flex wrapping, and that's the CSS term, by the way, flex wrap. So a developer, if you need to communicate this to a developer, just say, "Oh, it's a flex wrap," and they'll know exactly what you're talking about. And I do the same here. So one of the products I work on, there's basically a list of items. So I have a component which has, this is the 280 pixel width version where everything's like narrower and tighter. This is like the 320 pixel version, the 720 pixel version where there's now 2 columns, and then the full desktop version where it's like all stretched out. And that makes it easier, at least for me, to have a reference point. And I think that really is the only way we can do it. We can only statically show it. Now, if you're really keen to take that to the next level, you can always pull it into another tool, or you can use like there's plugins that will let you take a Figma file and pull them into like a web prototype. But yeah, you just have to deal with what you're given. It's all about communication, right? Once you've communicated, this is what this does. You don't need the prototype to go to that detail. You just need it to be enough that you go, this moves in this way, this wraps in this way. I mean, it gives us so much capability, auto layout, compared to the way it was, you know?
Absolutely. I'm conscious of time. We've got 10 minutes.
Yes.
We wanted to know if anyone had anything that they wanted us to look at, or if there's anything anyone's struggling with at the moment with their own work. If not, that's totally okay.
That's okay. And you can always reach out to us on our Slack channel as well. We're always open to hearing people's opinions. Sure. Have you got a link to that Slack channel, Mitch?
Yes, absolutely. I'll share one now. And also on the Slack channel in general, I've pasted a copy of this auto layout shortcuts, which Jamie has got in front of us here, as well as the resources gift bag thing, which isn't really a gift bag because it's just stuff we found online that we wanted to share with you. So I don't know if you can really say it's a gift bag, but we will continue to say it is. There you are. So please join the Slack if you haven't already. Jamie, is that it? Are we?
I don't think it's ever it, but with a feature as big as that, you know, there's like, we can go down the rabbit hole. But I think once you know those basic elements and you just play around with it, you learn through trial and error how things work. Yeah.
Megan asked, Jamie, did you say you used Flexbox Adventure or F?
Froggy. I think both of them are they're the same principle. So I think Froggy might go into grids. So so the person, I think it's the same person who made Flexbox Adventure. They also made this cute frog game. It's a bit like that old game Frogger, and you have to use CSS commands to get the frog to hop onto the leaf, or it's fun. You should check it out. It's actually understanding that will really help.
Yeah,
Thank you.
I think one of the links in the gift bag is someone has made a bunch of plugins where you can play classic games in Figma. So someone made Pong. Someone else made like Settlers of Catan. Yeah, quite a few different things. Very weird, very interesting.
Oh,
how do you access the gift
I
site?
use all my Medium articles. I may fish into that and grab the link. Aha, yes.
So you should be able to click on the link, and then you'll get to a prototype page. And then on the prototype page, there are various links, and they should all work, and you can play with that. And this is all thanks to Devon, and she actually added shortcut of the day, which is collapse all layers with Alt-L, which I didn't know.
That's like an unbelievable shortcut.
Never used that.
If you select all your layers and you press Alt-L or Option-L, it collapses everything at once. So when this file that I've basically been like opening things up, I'm in a total like, where am I going? If I select everything and press Option-L or Alt-L, it's all closed, back to normal.
Very cool.
Love it.
Awesome, guys. Okay, well, Jamie, if you're happy, I think we can leave it there. And then if anyone has any specific issues, or if you're having a tough day and you just need someone to like talk to or just say hi to, Slack channel's always open. And if anyone wants to talk about anything in the future, we'd love to have you talk about it. It shouldn't just be myself and Jamie. Thank you, guys. Thank you, Jamie, so much for this. We're gonna have.
Thank you.
Oh, awesome.
And listening to my ranting.
No, we love your ranting. These are always the most fun. We're gonna have. I'm gonna have a conversation with a guy called Joseph Downs, who reached out to me, content designer. So that'll probably be our next session, if all goes well. So yeah, thank you guys. I really appreciate it, and thank you. Well done, Jamie. That was excellent.
Oh, cheers. Yeah. Soon. So Audit Out in particular is one that I wanted to break down for a while. So hopefully it's helped make it a little clearer to people.
Yes, you should put a link into your article on the Slack channel as well.
Oh yeah. I've still got to finish that one, but I'll link that there. So basically, a lot of what I've talked about, I have in text form. It might be a bit easier to take your time and just go through it step by step.
Sure. I'll put that on the Slack as well. Great, guys. Thank you so much. I hope you have an awesome evening, and I'm excited to see you guys again next time.
Thanks a million, Mitchell. Catch you soon.
Be good.
Bye, folks.
Bye.